Hey friends, this is Eric the Mind Control Guy. Today I've been thinking about something from days gone by, and I tell you what, listening on the podcast, the radio, I don't know what we call it, radio, internet radio, called Dark Outpost, with Mr. David and Miss Penny, and great people, love the show. I've been on twice, and now they're going to have me back on a regular basis. It's on from 10 to 2 Eastern Standard Time, and they're on Rumble if you ever want to go listen to it. But anyway, I've been listening to some of the guests they've had on there, and some of these folks, some of these ladies describe the stuff that happened to them when they were younger. They were brought into either MK Ultra or something that happened after MK Ultra was supposedly shut down. And who really knows how many of these mind control projects there actually were. I mean, because you had the military sector, you had the federal government sector, you had the private sector. I dare say there's even people doing this on their own. Horrible stories that these ladies were telling. And anyway, it brought me back into thinking about, like I say, days gone by. Not what happened to me, and not what happened to the others. I'm not going to go into all that. A lot of you folks have heard the stories before, even though there's endless stories that I haven't told. I'm not talking about that. Today I'm talking about the twisted and demented minds back in the 70s and 80s that got it all started. And then, to my understanding, still go on today. And what I'm referring to is all those slasher movies that were made back in the 70s and 80s, and some are even still made. Why? I mean, seeing some serial killer or some demented, somebody from the criminally insane going out on a, slasher spree, why is that entertainment? And the thing is, there's a certain amount of these slasher movies that have been made for, close to 50 years now. Starting with, I think, the one that really started it all. But there's probably others that came before that I wasn't aware of. But the one that really started it all was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, in the movie, at the very beginning of the movie, they said that those events that happened in that movie, in the beginning of the movie, they said that those events actually happened. Today and for some time, they say, oh no, that was about Ed Gein. Well, Ed Gein was one individual from Wisconsin, and that the events of Ed Gein, I believe they say, happened back in the 40s. This was a family of cannibals. One wore a human skin mask, carried a chainsaw, and cut people up. And they talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Never heard about Ed Gein having a chainsaw. He may have, but I never heard about it. Grave robber. Found a book on anatomy after his mom died and wanted to see how things worked. But everything about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, nothing like we heard about Ed Gein, except for maybe wearing a human skin mask. Years ago, I was making a delivery down in Texas. I think it was either San Antonio or Austin, I think is where the delivery was made. I got to thinking about this, because I kept hearing about, oh no, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was about Ed Gein, blah, blah, blah. And so there were some older guys that worked at the place I was delivering to. And I point blank asked them. I said, what's the story here? Did this really happen in Texas, as the movie says? Or is it really about Ed Guy? And they said, yeah, it happened. It happened up in Round Rock. Round Rock, Texas. Yeah, it happened up in Round Rock. And I'm thinking, wow. But today, and for quite some time, trying to find a paper trail, documents, reports about that event, but you can't find them. They've either all been destroyed or they've been rabbit holed. An event like that, you've got to figure that an event like that is so hideous. So hideous. People don't want to be reminded if that's indeed what happened. And years ago, I used to run with a guy. He was from Oklahoma. He had been a police officer. He was older than I was. And we got to talking about this one time, and he goes, yeah, he said those events actually happened. And that whole thing about Ed Guy, and that's just what they tell people. But he said, no, those events actually happened, and they actually happened in Texas. Years ago, I was talking to my dad about it. And I asked him, did he ever hear about it? He goes, yeah, he heard about it. Yeah, those events actually happened in Texas. And I'm thinking, wow. I mean, here are people who were, alive and well back in those days. They said they remembered when it happened, and it happened in Texas. And now they say, oh no, that was about Ed Gein in Wisconsin. Well, if Hollywood can't get it right, then that's a big time where they can't get it right. But they said, no, that actually happened in Texas. Well, the fella I knew who used to be a policeman years ago, he said the same thing about the original Friday the 13th movie. He said it was inspired by events that actually happened at Crystal Lake. One time I did a Google search, and it said that I'm not sure as far as what Hollywood put in the movie. I'm not sure, what got right and what Hollywood fancified. But it was alluded to, yes, there was Crystal Lake, and there was some killings that actually happened that inspired the movie Friday the 13th. Wow. And a number of years ago, there was they had made at least 3 movies. I don't know if it was just a straight trilogy or if they made more, but there was a slasher movie called The Bunny Man. I don't know what year it was. I'm thinking it was back in the 40s in Fairfax County, Virginia. There was an actual case where a guy dressed up in a full-length, full-scale rabbit suit, bunny suit. People see the big bunny, they think the Easter bunny and all this stuff. Well, apparently this guy was seriously demented, whoever it was. I don't know if they ever got to the bottom of it. I didn't read a whole lot on it because it was just too disturbing. But I've seen it in multiple books where they talked about the Bunny Man. And some folks think it may have been an escaped mental patient. I don't really know. Like I say, I did not dive into all the details about it because I found it too disturbing. And if there was events that happened back in my days in the mind altering research study, I didn't want those vaults unlocked. It was bad enough that I had to remember one that was a simulation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Remembering that was bad enough. I didn't want to remember anymore. But the thing that bothers me is that, okay, some of these events were inspired by events, or some of these movies, I should say. Some of these movies, these slasher movies, some of inspired by events that actually happened. And how many of the incidents that were in these movies actually happened is anybody's guess. But I got to thinking about something. How many of all of these slasher movies that were made in the 70s and 80s and are still made today were inspired by events that actually happened, even though they don't tell us that it actually happened? There was a movie that came out in 1985 called Return of the Dead or Return of the Living Dead, and it had all the punk rockers on there. Return of the Living Dead with all the punk rockers. At the very beginning of the movie, it stated that the events portrayed in that movie actually happened. It doesn't say when, it doesn't say where, but it says they actually happened. So I got to thinking, how many of all of these different slasher movies, things that are just so demented, so twisted, how many of these movies were inspired by real events that actually happened, but maybe some of the facts were changed? And one of the reasons I bring this up, I was thinking about something the other day, and it reminded me of a movie I found at a truck stop in just the throwaway bin quite a number of years ago. And it was a movie called Terror Toons. TERRORTOONS. Terror Toons. Like cartoons. And the two individuals portrayed on the front of this movie looked like Gumby and Pokey on crystal meth. I mean, these were some very twisted individuals. And I did end up watching the movie. This was back in the days before everything really started coming back. And I just thought it was going to be some goofy movie. Oh, this movie is so twisted. The individual that portrayed the twisted doctor on there really reminded me of Dr. Borman. I'm like that's exactly how he was. And even though he was like a character, sometimes go back and forth between real life action, cartoon character, claymation, digital, whatever. That was the mentality. And they did things in that movie that were just so beyond twisted. I'm like, what the hell kind of human mind could have come up with this? It really messes with your head. Well, I was looking on the back of it. Come to find out, there was a company called Brain Damage Films. And apparently they made a number of films like this. I'm thinking, well, that's a good name for a company like that, but what kind of mind comes up with this? I mean, just so demented and so twisted. And then years later, the first time I was on Facebook, somebody put up a picture and they tried to blame the Muslims. They tried to say it was a real life picture that had just been taken not too long ago, and they said it was done by the Muslims. Well, come to find out, it wasn't done by the Muslims. It was a still from a movie, and what the picture showed was this lady being strapped to the bed and had a crucifix driven into her mouth out the back of her throat. That's what the image basically depicted. And when people started thinking that this is what the Muslims did, well, somebody jumped in there who actually knew and said, no, this is not, the Muslims didn't have anything to do with this. This was a still from a movie that came out in Canada some years before that. And I don't know if it's still on YouTube or not, but at one time they had both movies on there. It had the same name, but it was called 1 and 2. And the movie was called Inner Depravity. I watched a few bits and pieces of it. I had to turn it off. That movie is so demented, so twisted, I cannot comprehend how anybody with a rational mind could have come up with that. And obviously it was not somebody with a rational mind to come up with that. And to my understanding, there was a big court case in Canada over it. There is enough disturbed people out here in the world that do not need to be inspired to go out and duplicate what they saw on the silver screen or the TV screen. All these slasher movies that have been out here for over 40 years now. Those two movies that came out of Canada, and there's just no reason for it. The movies that were made by Brain Damage Films, there's no excuse for this. And anyway, I just need to get this off my chest. And anyway, you can go on YouTube for those who think I might be just making it up like trolls do. Trolls know who they are. Trolls don't believe in anything unless it happens to them. But there is blips and blurbs from the movie Terror Tunes on YouTube today. Go see it for yourself. I do not know if they show the whole movie. I have no desire to see any of it. But it has been put up there. At one time, Inner Depravity 1 and 2 was on YouTube. I don't know if it's still there, but it's pretty damn demented. Other movies by Brain Damage Films may be on there. I don't know. Blips and blurs from all these slasher movies over the years. I dare say they're probably on there too. But the world does not need more and more of these movies made. There's enough twisted individuals out here as it is, and the last thing they need is inspiration. But anyway, I had to get this off my chest. But I told you what they were, and I told you where you can go look for them. Google search, however you want to do it. But remember, if you dare go watch these movies, be prepared to not just be grossed out of your mind, but some of you with a more sensitive mindset, it may give you a brain scar. Having to watch the images in those movies, they may give you a brain scar. So be forewarned. Those twisted, demented slasher movies and the ones put out by Brain Damage Films and Inner Depravity, they are not for the faint at heart. But anyway, like I said, I needed to get this off my chest. It's been bothering me for a long time. Anyway, this is Eric the Mind Control Guy. Take care.